when a family or individual adopts from a country other than where they reside. When you adopt domestically, the adoptee is still within their own culture of origin, I suppose, and then adopting internationally, the adoptee is going from the culture of their origin to a different culture. So that's one big difference.
I think it's things that people experience or things that happen to them, whether it's within their control or not, that they carry with them throughout their lives that can affect multiple and different aspects of their life. I think adoption trauma has to do with adoptees not knowing where they're from or who their birth parents are, and having to move forward in this life, this different life that they've been given without that previous knowledge of where they've actually been from.
Trauma as it relates to adoption and adoptees is, to be perfectly honest, not something I had ever really considered was a thing. So this is new to me. I just assumed, I've always just assumed, because like mom and dad are great, that would like make it okay. That was like the main and only thing, was as long as like mom and dad were great, there would be no trauma or really any badness.
I've always struggled with kind of controlling my emotions and keeping them under control for my whole life, and never really understood what that was.
It makes me feel like I'm without anything.
I'd always felt some disconnect, even with my adopted family. No matter how much I love them and they love me, there's always been this disconnect, and I've always wanted to have that, I guess, biological connection.
Knowing your identity, what it is as an adoptee, and questions such as, where do you really come from, is something that it always rubs you the wrong way as an adoptee.
Can you describe your experience with trauma, specifically related to being an adoptee?
The traumas that I most experience that are related to adoption are things that I'm just really, in the last 6 or 7 months, have begun to unpack.
Adoption trauma comes into play, I think, a lot in my life.
How it affects me, I definitely experienced some type of separation anxiety for sure. There are many times, even though I know I have friends and I have people around me that that care about me. Anytime I like feel like I'm letting someone down, it definitely makes me feel very alone.
Not wanting to be left behind, the feelings of anxiety about abandonment, I guess, could rear their head all of my life.
Growing up, I definitely tried to fit in more with white individuals. I didn't realize that I was a person of color until I graduated from college, which was really hard, as you kind of realize, you look in the mirror and you thought you looked just like your family, but it turns out the world sees you in a completely different manner.
I don't think I've been through a lot of lived trauma in my life, but I do think that there is a few times just as an adoptee that I have to kind of stop and say, like, okay, how is that influencing me and how I think, or kind of how I see the world.
What about me?
You have expectations that no one necessarily places on you, and then when you kind of sit back and look at yourself, you realize that that entire time you never really explored who you were as a person. And for me, that all hit the minute I moved away from home. And I realized that I didn't actually know what I liked to do for fun or what I wanted to do with my life. And kind of all at once happened with that imposter syndrome kind of come crashing down.
For me, I haven't always like looked at myself as like a true Asian, because like I don't, live in like those traditions. I don't know the culture. Like I grew up in a white household, so I still try to keep like my own culture alive, if that makes sense. Like I like to learn more about the culture. I like to like look at like how they prepare their food, or like other stuff that they would like normally do around the house. And my parents like kind of have always tried to keep it instilled in me.
It's a different acceptance in the sense that you look like everybody else, but when you realize that they realize that you're different because you can't speak the language, you don't know the cultures and the traditions, it is actually quite heartbreaking. And ever since then, I've actually struggled quite a lot with, I guess I've been researching a lot on Korean, on our histories, and things like that, and our people, and just reading that sort of thing, and I guess looking at our language, everything about it feels familiar, it sounds familiar, everything about it is natural and right, except for the fact that I can't speak it. And actually that has been incredibly devastating to me lately, and especially because my daughter as well has become much more, she's really proud to be half Korean, even though she knows almost probably less than I do. She's just really proud of it, and it breaks my heart that I can't be the one to teach her that, at least not yet.
Can you give an example of a time when you felt overwhelmed by a particular traumatic event? For example, birth parent loss or cultural racism?
A really traumatic event that I kind of experienced was and to have my mother say that she doesn't want to connect with me or talk to me or even send photos was just pretty traumatic to me. It took me a long time to process, and I'm still processing it, and I'm constantly going through these different waves of emotions of just being really angry and frustrated, and then sad, as well as just also understanding her position as a female, a woman in Korea, that if you have a child born out of wedlock, that it's extremely stigmatized, and she has a new family. So I guess if I was ever to be known to her current family, it would really like destroy her life.
What I learned growing up, and especially working in mental health, especially with grief, is that I had a lot of trauma to deal with, in the sense that before I was adopted, my adopted mom lost a son, a biological son, and then had a son, and then chose to adopt. So I had that kind of on my shoulders growing up. But then also something I didn't deal with is that they tried to adopt a baby before me who ended up passing away. So a lot of the trauma that I've dealt with growing up was more related in grief trauma.
Other adoptees will probably say this, but in the medical just category, it's really hard to not know things about your medical history. And so I know one time I was filling out a thing and it asked about paternal and maternal history, and there was not a box to click like unknown or skip or adopted or something. And then I remember that same form said, are your parents alive or dead? And one, I think that's horrible language to ask anyone. But two, I was like, well, I don't know. And again, I couldn't skip it. And so, that's been a little bit frustrating. Another thing that happened in high school, a long time ago, we had a father-daughter dance, and my dad couldn't make the father-daughter dance. And so I was asking someone if they had like an uncle or brother or someone I could dance with. And this girl who had recently learned I was adopted, she, in front of the whole group, said, well, why don't you just go to Russia and find your real dad? And I was like, wow, okay. No. And so I just stared at her and I was shocked, and I just ran out of the room and cried about it. And that was probably the worst thing someone's actually said to me.
An interesting thing was when you're adopted from Holt, at least, you are brought home with a bag that has your adoption number. It has your birth name before your Americanized name if your adoptive parents give you an American name. And inside of it are medical documents if you had any medical issues. There is like a photo album, some clothes and such, which I did receive from my foster mother. She liked to knit, so she gave me a lot of hand knit outfits, I guess. So that's what was in my bag. And along with it, which I didn't realize until actually a few months ago, is she wrote me a letter. And after reading the letter, it was a very traumatic experience reading that and actually having somewhat of a connection to my birth process. Even if it's not my actual birth mother, it is a closer connection to Korea, since I'm a Korean adoptee, than I was actually expecting. I didn't think there was going to be a note of anything in there. It would all just be in my file, which is online now. So that was it was kind of painful, but also enlightening experience to feel and to absorb as an adoptee.
My adopted mom actually got breast cancer when I was 10 years old, and my dad was not, really there. He was not the best father, and he wasn't around whenever my mom had cancer. And one of the biggest things I thought in my head was I'd rather be adopted again than to live with my dad and have my mom pass away if that happened. So that was something that I feel like a 10-year-old should not have to think about. So that was, I guess, a very more of a traumatic event.
It was actually when I started my birth search, I was informed about a year later by Eastern Social Welfare that she was dead. So that then triggered one of multiple suicide attempts, both previous and after. But then, so I ended up going to Korea in July to attend the ICA conference in 2019 of that same year. And I think that was one of probably the things that really saved my life.
Adoptees commonly find that seeking guidance from a non-adoptee mental health professional is not helpful to them. If you've had this experience, why do you think this is the case?
He wasn't educated or trained specifically in adoption, but he was very good at helping me process feelings, and he also felt a lot of my issues or challenges were because of the family I grew up with. So he was helpful to a point, but when it came to not being trained as a adoption specific therapist, I think he had some blind spots there.
Another case manager who had someone who was adopted, we would spend some time talking about what it meant to feel no self of self-identity, to just feel out of place. And a lot of people struggle with just the ability to say that they don't know who they are, or the ability to say that they grew up in a negative environment if they were never abused. Because I think too often we think of you have to have bruises to be hurt growing up. The sessions are typically not successful, which is unfortunate. But again, without that research, without that teaching ability to tell professionals, like, this isn't just someone experiencing racism in America. This is someone experiencing no sense of self and racism, maybe within themselves.
What are your thoughts on intergenerational or historical trauma?
But as far as intergenerational trauma and all of that, I think that on one hand, I have changed the course of my family history, or maybe I should say my family history, the course of my family history has been changed for me, right? I didn't decide to be adopted. So I just think that's an interesting concept. And so hopefully, I'm just making assumptions because again, I don't know, but I would assume that I have stopped the line, or hopefully have stopped the line of poverty.
It affects us individually, but it also affects us as a collective. And when we start seeing it outside of our own individual perspectives, once we understand ourselves, we can start to understand the systemic issues when it comes to that.
I worry about moving forward, having children. Am I going to put my bias, my prejudice towards the white people onto my children? And that's not what I want to do, but there is some science behind that of you experiencing trauma, racism, financial struggles, addiction. All of that can be genetic.
You should be grateful, is one of the comments adoptees hear most often. Do you think the people using this phrase will ever comprehend the negative effect it has on adoptees?
I don't think people will ever comprehend the negative effect that it has, because, as I said, the loss that you suffer to begin with being adopted is huge, but then you never know what that adoptee has also experienced on top of that loss since their life in their new country with their new families.
What has helped you overcome your trauma? If you're still struggling, what has seemed to work and what hasn't?
Writing in a journal for me has been very helpful to get my thoughts and feelings on paper. And I do it writing by hand, not just typing, because I think it helps to get the energy and your thoughts out. I was taught years ago in therapy to also
write with your non-dominant hand. So if you're right-handed like me, you use your left hand. That way it doesn't look, the writing doesn't look very legible, but it helps you to get really into your deep inner authentic feelings.
So it wasn't until college where I finally found on Facebook the CCI group. And that's when I realized, I connected more with my culture, and found out there's a lot more people like us who are adopted from China and, due to the one-child policy. Opening up to people, really accepting yourself, accepting the fact that you do have flaws. Some of them stem from being adopted, and that's okay. That's just going to be part of your personality, and to accept that and to, feel that moment and feel that feeling, but also let it go, knowing that it's okay to feel that way.
What advice would you give to your younger self or another adoptee youth first experiencing these same struggles?
I would say know that you're not alone, and know that you can go at your own pace on this journey. No matter when that starts happening or where that you are in the journey, you have the ability to control the pace that you approach it.
Adoption is not one-sided. It's not all positive or not all negative. So I would just tell them that if they can't find joy in anything having to do with their adoption, let's work on finding joy somewhere else. Like, let's find joy somewhere in your life. That's what I would give any adoptee at any age. That's the advice I would give them. And then I guess I would just also remind them that their adoption story as an adoptee is really powerful, and maybe to get some kind of creative outlet, write something down, dance it out, paint something. It doesn't have to be in the arts, but that's just what comes to mind.
Try to be kind to yourself and be easy on yourself. Everybody goes through it all at their own pace, whether they decide to want to connect with that side of their history or not is totally up to you. And whether you pursue looking for your birth parents or not is totally up to you. Don't let anyone else make that decision for you, either for or against, because that can only be a decision that is made by you when you're ready.
What is something that you feel adoptive parents or non-adoptees should know when talking about adoption?
Definitely be more sensitive about the topic, anything regarding to, being an Asian, being a girl, being, different, being sensitive to that, and making sure that you really cherish and you love upon your child. And the thing is about adoptees is they have to have a lot of reassurance. You can't just tell it to them once and think they believe it. You have to reassure them constantly, to the point where that they never question it. So that's one thing I would definitely give to adoptive parents who are looking to adopt, is to really ensure that into their child and how much they love them.
If you don't know anything about adoption, start with understanding that there's an adoption trauma spectrum and we all fall on it. But if you're looking at adoption, if you're a parent of an adopted child, remembering that they have a history.
Trauma and depression are so much deeper than just being sad.
There's a certain amount of low self-esteem that comes from that original feeling of abandonment that we all experienced, and not feeling like we live up to what we should because of something we have missing in us.
Patrick Armstrong. I am a 30-year-old Korean American adoptee. I was born in Seoul in 1990 and adopted to an all-white family in rural Indiana about 7 months later.
My name's Elliot Bliss. I'm a South Korean transracial adoptee. I was adopted from South Korea when I was 6 months old, and I was adopted into a white family here in Oregon.
My name is Darren Watson. I am a reunited adoptee of 25 years, and I was born in Canada in 1970.
So my name is Kylie Bartz. I'm 23 years old. I grew up in Minnesota. I moved to Wisconsin for my undergrad degree. Then I moved to Ohio for a little bit. I'm back in Minnesota for my graduate degree. Transracially adopted from Calcutta, India into a white, German, Swedish, Polish family.
My name's Elena, and I am a social worker in Texas, and I was adopted from Russia when I was 18 months old.
My name's Michelle. I was adopted from South Korea to Australia when I was 4.5 months old.
My name's Casey Wagner. I was adopted when I was 3.5 from Wuhan, China, Hubei province. Something that is very unique about my story is it was said that I lived with my birth parents for about a year before I was abandoned. And then I was at the orphanage for 2.5 years before I actually got adopted.
I'm Cynthia Spencer. I was adopted in 1958, and I was born in Korea and was given up for adoption in Busan, but ended up in an orphanage in Seoul, Korea. And was adopted when I was only 5 weeks old. My mom and dad always said that I was their bundle of joy from across the ocean.
My name is Brittany Rourke. I was adopted from Anhui, China, and I was raised into a Polish and Irish family.
Hello, Annyeong. My name is Julianna Souther. I'm a Korean adoptee. I was adopted from South Korea when I was 8 months old, and I currently reside in Corvallis, Oregon. I'm the filmmaker of voicing Adoption Diaspora, and I just want to thank everyone for taking the time to watch it and really absorb all the great information that I've gathered from learning about myself and through these other wonderful adoptees that I got to interview and include in here. So thank you so much, adoptees. Everyone else, thank you so much for supporting us and learning about our community. It is, I think it's a smaller community than most people think. And a lot of the things that we deal with may seem very common, but there's almost like an extra layer of sadness and loneliness that is attached to an adoptee. And learning about adoption trauma, I think, is also something people don't often think about when they think of an adoptee, a child, even family members that think of adoptees. So I want to thank you all for taking the time to really think about all these great questions, these great answers, and the experience of from the beginning of learning you're adopted to up to now, what we've learned from these experiences and how we've navigated through this kind of lifestyle, if you will. So thank you so much, everyone, and I hope you enjoyed it.